Hey guys, welcome back to Trekyards. As always, I'm Captain Foley.
As always, I am Commander Cockings.
And we have a special guest with us today.
But not as always.
That's right. So introduce yourself, let us know who you are and what you do.
What's going on, everybody? I'm Lore Reloaded. I run the channel Lore Reloaded, where I talk about all things lore, specifically known for like Trek stuff going on. I try to do other things, but I'm more known for breaking down like starships and just looking at the in-universe, in-canon lore of things that are going on.
I think we can relate to that. We have an interest in that too.
Yeah, I see your channel named in my comments a lot, so I'm really happy to be here with you guys.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we're glad to have you because you do some great work. But today we're going to be doing something new here. We're going to have a discussion,
Debate,
maybe an argument.
Maybe
might just be a friendly discussion. We don't know yet. But what's the topic of today's discussion, Samuel, for viewers out there?
So the classic starship of the fifth Star Trek show, if you count the animated series, the USS Voyager. You know, known to be lost out in the Delta Quadrant. We only ever see one other version, the Blerathon, Section 31, not really sort of a ship. But there's a question about that ship. Is it actually a warship?
In one episode, for sure, there was Warship Voyager. I don't know if you remember that.
32 phaser cannons, and that one, yes.
Yes.
That's when they weren't trying to pretend that it was a science ship. They were just being honest about it in that episode. Everything else is just veiled.
Everything else is fake news, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Every time they say they're science, it's all fake news.
There you go.
I love how that's a meme for us, even in the Star Trek genre now.
Absolutely. So I guess the real question is, it's definitely a specialist ship. I mean, they kind of say that it was meant for shorter, more scientific missions. I think. I'm not going to say it's a warship. I wouldn't classify it as that.
Well, let's put our voices first. And then we'll go back and let Mr. Law go out it. But yeah, so Stuart, you think that's your vibe, is it?
Yeah, I think it's more of a short-term exploratory scientific craft. I mean, it doesn't have a whack load of shuttles. It doesn't have an over large amount of weaponry. It's not very big. It's just I feel like it's not designed specifically for battle.
Yeah, it's weird. We got to look at the show is obviously biasing us. Because we saw it as a long-term explorative craft. That's how we saw it, so we associate it as that. But take it out of that context, what is it really? You know, it's a ship that got more screen time, more fleshing out than, say, an Akira or a Saber, and all those things were not necessarily designed for a purpose. It was either retcon back in, or someone said it at one point, this must be this. And it's like, it was designed to be a 3-second ship. It's not really anything until, you know what I mean? Voyager was something else. And we see it always be able to win the battle in the Delta Quadrant, but that's just because it was sort of said early on, most races in that part of the space are lesser technology. So that, again, biases us contextually differently. So it was a really difficult question. But Mr. Law, because I think it's funny, we say our names, you say, I'm Law Reloaded, Mr. Law. You had this topic a while ago on your channel, and we want to discuss it further. So what's sort of the streamlined, I guess, soundbite to where this came from?
Well, it's really nuanced. Every time I talk about Voyager, it always comes up. Is it a warship or is it a science ship? Is it meant for long distance, long range, or is it meant for short stints, kind of like Captain Foley says? And I think that a lot of it comes to inconsistent writing. But just looking at the in canon and in universe, I'd have to say it's probably at best a 50-50 ship. It's meant for both war and science, and I think I have justification for that. Would be the sound clip. I can go further into that, but I think there's a good justification that what I would believe beginning to be the Dominion War series of ships, it's 50-50.
I would buy that, to be perfectly honest with you. It's just a good mindset to have when you have a force like Starfleet that you want to defend, you want to be able to be defensive, offensive if need be, and then do your regular routine of scientific exploration. So I think there's a good mix of that in pretty much all of the later Star Trek ships of that era. I mean, TOS was more exploratory, I think. I don't think they were realizing what kind of... Well, definitely NX era. They didn't know what they were stepping into because they were complaining that every week they were running into somebody that was shooting at them, which they didn't expect. So I think it's a good a good mindset to be in, to have your ships be capable of both. And I think you're right on that. That era specifically has them set up that way.
But it's tricky because the moniker of warship. What is a warship? I mean, the Enterprise D, the Galaxy class, was able to take on the lead, the primary ship of the Cardassian fleet and other big ships. It was a capital ship with heavy firepower, heavy shields. Like it could do a battle role. So designed for war, the only ship designed for war was the Defiant and Prometheus with a tactical explicit systems, and like the Defiant as a somewhat lack of shields and lack of other things. That's a deficiency in one to make a warship. Voyager clearly has a much more flexible thing, but at its release, a warship seems like an odd phrasing, because if you give it the most advanced phasers, the most advanced torpedoes, suddenly it's going to outperform the last 10 classes. Just the nature of the most advanced things, give the most advanced shields. The binaural, circuitry, I'm sure, enhanced its output of everything else. Suddenly you're gaining points in these fields, but is that not just to keep up with where we are technologically? As the wars were starting and getting more aggressive, you want to push those technologies further anyway. So you're seeing those being put in, but it would be odd to design for war, or just bumping up. Like in an RPG, Skyrim, you have, would you give stuff to charisma or to strength or to speed? Well, we're going to make it more balanced rather than just, 8 to science, 2 to battle. I feel like warship is such a weird thing, because there's only really 2 warships, and they were super specialist,
I'm going to have to disagree with you a
Cool.
little bit here. And just a couple of things to break down. First off, when I look at the Cardassians during the TNG era specifically, I remain unimpressed with their technology. They seem more a regional power until Deep Space Nine. We see a Nebula class take on a Cardassian ship with its shields effectively down. They weren't, but they had the way to bypass the shields. And, we see a Galaxy class get destroyed by a bird of prey. So if a Nebula can take on a Cardassian...
Well, lack of shields again.
I'm joking.
Yeah.
Well, but the Nebula had lack of shields. It was the exact same situation. But that was more a joke. But I think that you pump up a Galaxy class ship against maybe a Didera Dex. Or... Vorcha, I think, was more Deep Space Nine era, right? I don't think they had those in TNG. But I think a Didera Dex versus
it was the flagship of TNG.
Right.
So it's like 4 or 5 times.
Right. But let's look at the lore specific to what happened to Starfleet, right? They made the Defiant, which was the first warship. This was complete warship. Nothing about this was meant for science. Per what we see in canon, it fell out of interest, or it became taboo again for the Federation to have warships. They started thinking more about science. Borg wasn't that big of a deal, even though it was 5 years. So they started going back to making ships that were for science. And I believe that what occurred was Starfleet, you did have some military hawks in Starfleet who wanted to build ships that could defeat the Borg or could take on the new Dominion threat during the Dominion Cold War. But they were still stuck with Federation ideals. And so they made a deal where half of it has to be a science ship, and half of it can be what they want it to be. That's why when we look at Voyager, when we look at, I think, arguably the Akira class, even though I think you and me disagree on the Akira class when it comes to its design, when we look at the Sovereign, I think the Sovereign is a wonderful example of that. They have both a scientific measure and a war-like measure. But Starfleet doesn't call things warships. Starfleet doesn't do war. We just indirectly do war when it comes to Starfleet specifically. I mean, that's my opinion when you look at the timeline itself. I don't know if you guys would agree with that or not.
I would. I mean, we talked about this with our Galaxy class episode. It was kind of, when TNG started, there was an unprecedented time of peace for the Federation. There hadn't been any major scuffles up to that point. For quite a while, about 80 years, 100 years, something like that. So the Galaxy class was made to house families. I mean, that's one of the biggest arguments I hear about it. Well, they shouldn't have families on board. I don't know if I agree with that necessarily. It's kind of for its mission in TNG, with Gene Roddenberry at the helm, with Gene Roddenberry's vision, it very much fits. They should have families on board. But realistically, and I mean, we've talked about this with Doug Drexler too. Ships shouldn't be facing each other. They should have a love beam and all this. And it really irritates us when we ask him who would win in a versus, because it doesn't matter, he says. But my thinking is you can't go wandering around the neighborhood without expecting somebody to have a stick aimed at you. You need to have a bigger stick, or a stick that you can at least defend yourself with. So when we do versus things with Doug, we're asking a serious question. Which do you think would win? We never get a serious answer, unfortunately. As much as I love Doug, he just doesn't want to get into that. But I can see his point. I mean, that's not Gene Roddenberry's original vision of the future. So I think when we started the TNG era, there was that kind of different mindset, but you can see it definitely changed during the course of the TNG all the way through the movies, and by the end, when you get the Enterprise E and all these new ships for First Contact, you can definitely see a different influence at play there. Kind of downsizing the ships, because the Sovereign, it is smaller than the Galaxy class as far as internal volume and things like that go. So I think it's much more aimed at being an all-purpose ship as opposed to just a luxury liner in space. So I think that's my thinking on it anyway, that yes, they were going that way, especially with the Dominion War and the Borg. There was a lot of influences that would make them kind of rethink their design philosophies.
And can I jump at some parallels there? You mentioned, going to the E, the volume getting smaller and such. We'll look at how, we'll ignore NX, TOS, or pre-TOS Discovery stuff, because that is all inconsistent now. But TOS, Cold War, and then other things happen, then you get the Excelsior, clearly this big step up, everything gets upscaled, but it's very much the same design upscaled. Then you get the C, everything's upscaling again, the D, everything's upscaling again, and then suddenly, the war footing, everything sleeks down. Closer to the more tactical ships of the Connie and the Excelsior, which were more efficient in those forms. The C was, I guess, more of an experiment, phaser strips, but the D loses that maneuverability in favour of just upscaling everything for families, for power generation, for shields. And in terms of families, the fact is, if any ship in Star Trek, bar Borg Cube, say, when you lose its shields, any torpedo can cause damage to any system and you can blow up the ship. I mean, everything is vulnerable. So families, it's like, families only really say to the long-term nature of the mission, which I think is a reason for saying Voyager certainly isn't a long-range explorer, otherwise it would have had at least the ability to have couples and it can't be super long range, because the D was the only real long range one, and that had the families. That was the atmosphere. So it's probably shorter to mid, although since it's the fastest ship in the fleet, shorter and mid is a bit more relative, because if you can just pop there and back in less time, then a mission can be shorter just in its very nature. But then it sort of comes down to what can the Voyager or the Intrepid class do in terms of firepower? Is that not just on par with what is technologically at the time? Can an Intrepid still take on a Galaxy despite the mass increase in size, the extra shield power? I mean, if it's more of a warship, then is it not just it's powerful for its size? It's a lot of technology in a small bundle, which makes it more tactically viable. Is that not more the question?
And smaller, more structurally sound. It's more maneuverable. It's
which is a huge thing in battles. Yeah,
running circles around a Galaxy class, I would imagine. So.
So here's the way I kind of look at it, going all the way up until Voyager, and I guess that's kind of some of the differences between my channel and a lot of other channels, is that what matters to me is what's in canon and what I can infer logically from in canon, not necessarily.
Do that as well.
No, I'm not. I said a lot of. I'm not saying you guys. Okay. I'm just saying a lot of other channels. But for instance, and we've had this conversation, where if even someone who's designed the ship says it does something, I need to see it on screen for me to really get behind it. And that wasn't a slight towards you, so I apologize if you guys took it as a slight. I'm just saying that one of the reasons the channel is that I more look at the in canon. Lynn, you guys do too. So when we look at the original series and we look at what Kirk has said and what happens, that was during the Klingon Cold War, for all intents and purposes. And I think that it was reflective of the era of how battle was done. And I might get the comparisons wrong here, but I hope you get the idea, because I wasn't in the military. But the Constitution class was the bigger ship. It was like a battleship. It was the big dog on campus. That was the way that the Federation generally did its wars and its fight. It had smaller ships, but it liked to bring the big dogs out too, right? And so even Kirk says that we're soldiers. So, and one of the things that Gene said going into TNG is the Starfleet and the Federation won the Klingon Cold War. And so after that, like you said, they didn't really have a counter to continue to push them. And I call it TNG pacifism. I believe that early series TNG, Starfleet began this very, for lack of a better word, toxic, pacifistic view of things. That's why we have families on ships, because we're thinking, oh, we've won, we're top dog, we're not challenged. We have faith that we can defend families so much that we're going to put them on our deep space explorer vessels, which I think is a bad idea regardless. One of the reasons I think that's a bad idea is if you explore enough, you'll find the Vidians. And that's the last thing I'd want to see happen, is my child's organs literally sucked from her body, right? That would hurt morale on a ship. So I think it's a bad idea. I think when Q talks about it, how bad it is, his lines in there are epic. And so you have a ship that's powerful, don't get me wrong, but not as powerful as it could be. Then we have the Dominion Cold War, and we have Voyager, or the Intrepid, which is one of the ships that was at the start of the Cold War, was really a Dominion-era ship, in my opinion. And again, I don't think it could take on a Galaxy class, but I think it is more advanced than a Galaxy class, and I think a couple of them probably could. I think that if the Galaxy class was made like the Intrepid was, when it was first designed, but in the TNG era, I think it would be a lot different and a lot more souped up. You keep saying it's short range. I remember reading and hearing somewhere, and I might be wrong, so you guys can correct me, but I thought the ship could go years without needing to be refueled. Which, again, this is somewhat of the inconsistent writing. If that's true, that might lead you to believe that it could be long range. But all you have to do is look at the Intrepid versus like the Oberth, the TNG era or the TOS era Oberth, right? Mm-hmm. Just look at the tactical systems. Even with the new technology, the new era technology, it's way souped up compared to what they did with an Oberth. They could put a lot more on the Oberth at the time. Look at the ship. Let's not even consider Voyager, because I think Voyager is an anomaly. I think you could make some justifications for what we see in the show, why Voyager may not be what was intended for the Intrepid class vessel overall. So let's look at the Bellerophon, like you said. Yeah, I'm horrible with names. You guys are going to find that out pretty quick. For those who haven't seen the channel, I'm Southern and my pronunciation is always off.
Just before you go into your full point there, yeah, the Bellerophon's super interesting because it's such a parallel or an opposite. I mean, look at what it did, which we'll go into now. That says something, so I'll let you.
Well, and I mean, it's just when you look at what it was used for, I won't say top secret, but high dignitaries. It was used for admirals. Section 31 was on it and used it arguably. It was a ship that was relied upon heavily. I've never seen any in canon justification, but I have heard that it was even the flagship for the fleet. Admiral Ross was. I don't know if that's true or not. I've never seen in-canon justification for it. But the Intrepid was relied on heavily, and I think that was because of its high warp, the fact that it had the most advanced weapons for its class. At the time, there had been more advanced, defensive systems like shields for its time. And I think that it was specifically designed with the Dominion in mind. Just looking at the Bellerophon, I wish we had seen it more in Deep Space Nine. It would have been nice to see them in combat. The ship itself, even the design of the ship, lowers its profile, makes it harder to hit. They souped it down versus the massive ships. And that kind of is going back to what I was saying in TOS, where you had huge targets, ultimately was more miniaturized for combat. Mm-hmm. So arguably, I think it's a 70-30, 70 war, 30 science, but that's not something I'd defend. I'd be comfortable with 50-50.
Yeah, see, I've always thought of the Intrepid more as a scientific research vessel, like for short 3-month missions kind of thing. That's kind of the vibe I get from it. But one of the things that takes away from that a little bit is there is 2 warp cores, and there's also parts to build a spare warp core should the need arise, which to me, for a short-term mission, really is confusing. Now, this is not canon information. This is stuff based on what Rick Sternbach has said. It's also in the Intrepid technical manual. So they could build a whole new warp core with the spare parts they had on board, which is very convenient when you're going to the Delta Quadrant, and you might need to. So I don't know why specifically they would have that on board for being a short-term research or scientific mission ship. But that's the size that the size that the Intrepid is, that's very much the vibe that I get. That it's not meant for extended long-term missions, because it's just, you got such a small crew, you're gonna get sick of each other pretty quick. I think there's not a lot of room. That's just my opinion. It's almost like they were an experimental test bed for new technology using the biogel packs, which I think is also a bad idea. As soon as I heard that when I first started watching the show, I'm like, okay, your ship's going to get infected with something. That's just stupid. Exactly. Sure, it increases speed. I don't really buy that either. Oh. But so again, you don't want that being on a long-term, a far from home kind of mission. I don't know. There's arguments for both sides, and the spare warp core thing really bugs me.
Well, I think they kept adding, little things, and obviously it was designed with the mission of the Delta Quadrant in mind, even if that wasn't, the Starfleet design, it was the show design. Right. They gave it all the cool things that it had to have, that obviously lended it to realistically, if you had a show about the Equinox doing 7 years, you'd be like, yeah, it's not gonna, no. Even the E2 Enterprise, it's like, within 25 years, it'd been radically redone. But I do want to jump back to the Blerathon for a second. I mean, you made most of the argument there, but, just the pure fact it was chosen to go to Romulus.
Right.
The two shots we see it in are basically with the Deredexes. The fact that they feel safe enough to be in the heart of one of the, not enemies, frenemies territories, but where any Deredex should theoretically be able to take it out. But the fact that it was there, they knew it could take on, survive, give a battle, whatever. It was at least capable. And again, maneuverability, that'll run circles absolutely around a Deredexes. So I think that would be, especially against Romulans, the Voyager's probably better because they like bigger ships. But we keep mentioning the Dominion War, but the Voyager was launched and designed before the Dominion War.
Right.
That had no Dominion influences at all. Now the Blerathon was post Dominion War, so obviously.
Let me disagree with you, and okay. I may need to look up my dates, but I believe that it was either so you may be able to prove me wrong instantly here. I believe it was designed either at the beginning or at the beginning, at the start of the same thing. It was designed either shortly after or at the beginning of the Dominion Cold War. Let me ask you this: when was the Intrepid launched? The Intrepid launched, the first Intrepid, and when was the destruction of the Odyssey?
I don't know, but I can tell you about Voyager specifically. Okay. It was launched the same year Generations happened, which was 2 years before the Dominion War started, and they only discovered the Dominion in the same year. So the entire design process, it might have been altered in those couple of months, but Janeway was already on the ship ready to launch around the same time they even met the Dominion, and that was just the Jem'Hadar before there was a war. So the Voyager itself is out of that running. It's more a Borg threat, but the Blerathon would certainly have been souped up, and you can imagine all you have to do for the Blerathon is swap it for Quantums. That would make it an instant. Like, that would jump its tactical ability 1 billion, and just add 10 more, remove secondary systems, add more shield emitters. You could really soup it up. But in terms of, I've always found this is a Borg killing ship. That's the most stupid statement you could have. Okay, yes to a probe, yes to a sphere, but if the Borg come at you in any sort of threatening way, no ship. The 2 incidents, they've lost 1 billion ships. There is no Borg defeating ship, and to think the Defiant could, it survived 10 hours in a battle with the Cube. It's fantastic. The Cube was still intact and was able to kill everyone on Earth. It's a complete failure. So even designing the Voyager to defeat the Borg, there is no ability to do that. So I think Warship is just a tactically able ship. They souped up its tactical, souped up its everything to be in line with its maneuverability, and suddenly you outclass capital ships and yet can provide most of the same punch,
Right. I mean, I don't want to delve off into it. At some point, we should also discuss First Contact, because I think, was the ship going to be destroyed or not is an interesting conversation, because there's some dialogue, because it was heavily damaged, right? I don't know. I don't want to get into the weeds on that. There's something maybe.
That's a whole different conversation we can have.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. At a separate time, that'd be interesting, because I would argue that they may have actually won that, which a lot of people disagree with. So, I mean, just something to take.
There we go. That's a whole new video.
There's nothing I necessarily disagree with you. I think I got my dates wrong then when it comes to the launch of the Voyager and the ship before it.
Yeah, the first one was launched in 2370, the Intrepid. The second ship, Voyager, was commissioned in 2371.
Well, commissioned means launched, though. Because caretaker was 2371, so it was launched that year. So
Well, so here's my question for you. And let me see if is anyone here agree. Captain Foley, you seem like you're more near it. Are you more near it being a science ship then?
I am.
So my question for you is then why when we see Starfleet create a science ship in the Oberth, which has arguably, now, other sources may say otherwise, but arguably one phaser bank and deflector shields. Now, even if we accept out other resources, it only has a few phaser banks and a few torpedo launchers. It's not meant for combat. Why do you think they'd make the Oberth like they did, basically a lab on nacelles, and Voyager the most advanced ship of its time when launched?
We've kind of had this discussion before with the Oberth. Whether it's even a Starfleet design or whether it's contracted to a different organization, because even the design of the nacelles and everything looks slightly different on it and not necessarily falling in line with Starfleet vessels that we've seen. So it's almost like it's an outside contractor that brought it in. Maybe it was a Vulcan-based contractor that builds these ships. That's why they look slightly different, or Tellarite or something. And they're just employed by the Federation as scientific research vessels within their sphere of influence. So there's very little risk of having an enemy ship attacking it. You send it to areas where you're protected. It's not going into the unknown, so to speak. It's going to study an asteroid that's coming into
when
a
also
system.
territory was a lot smaller then. You're only going to go out a bit. Those aren't going to go on the edges of. I mean, they could, but that shouldn't be what you send it at. Whereas Voyager, as soon as you say, right, we're going to go past where we know, or to the edge of Klingon space, to the edge of Romulan, boom, now there's a tactical element because just in case. And again, it's most advanced in terms of binaural, which leads to computing power. Speed that leads to getting in and out of situation, plus just shorter missions and longer missions, but then getting back quicker. And sensors, which is again a science, obviously can be used tactically, but those three things it pioneers is peaceful tech, whereas the E obviously pioneered the quantum, or well, I guess define whichever one they pioneered the quantums and the whatever.
And it could be too, if you take the Oberth as like a direct or a predecessor to the Intrepid class, it could be that, hey, we learned from our mistakes. That thing got blown up pretty easy. Maybe we lost a few of them. Similar instances.
I'd say the Nova is a more spiritual successor to the, because the Nova is more the direct comparison. That's a short range survey vessel, limited firepower, couldn't really take on anyone particularly. I was a year in or several years in, but Voyager was able to take it out effectively instantly. A couple of torpedoes, it's gone. It's not a very tactical ship, but Voyager was that. Head, almost like back to TOS. The Constitution class was the core of both the exploration and the we can defend if we need to. Voyager was potentially the newest, the best line of science, and also because if you're already going to be far out, maybe there's a tactical thing you need to suddenly jump in and help, and you can warp. If you're going to build a ship that's already very capable and it has the best warp, well, that's the ship you might instantly call to back you up in another situation. Warp 9.975 is a huge jump from 9.9. That's a big leap. So I guess it's more well-rounded, science, but with the ability to be tactical, and again, just a more, unfriendly world and galaxy.
Well, the Intrepid was also the first ship to have multiphasic and multi-spectrum shielding, right?
Which is good for anomalies and nebulae, distortions.
Enemy fire.
Yeah, all the things.
But that was going to be my next question. I'd be interested, Captain Foley, your opinion, as Commander Cockings brought up with the Nova class. I don't think we could argue that the Nova class was commissioned by anybody else but Starfleet. And while it is definitively in almost every way better than an Oberth, it's still wanting, for a better word. And I think it is definitively science too. There's not a lot there to lead me anything else.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, as he said too, it's more of a short-range survey craft. Goes in, takes high detailed scans of a planet or system, and then is back home. It's not going very far. Looking at the Memory Alpha page for the Intrepid here, it does say long-range explorer. I didn't know it was classified as that on Memory Alpha.
But that's why there's discussion. That's sort of the conventional, what we'll think of, but breaking it down.
I think this is a retcon description on Memory Alpha, to be honest.
And I'll say this, I love Memory Alpha. Like you guys, they're a primary resource. When I start looking up something, first thing I go to is Trekyards and Memory Alpha. But I always trust but verify. There are things that I disagree with in Memory Alpha. It is at its core a wiki. They're great. I love them, not putting them down. But it is a wiki at its core. So trust but verify when it comes to that information. So like you said, I don't know that I'd even rely on that classification. Because, again, there's arguments for both, honestly.
Yeah.
What would you say? Let me ask this, if I can. What would you say to the multiple times we have the crew calling the ship a combat vessel? We have Janeway saying it once or twice, and we have the felon. What was his name?
Paris.
Paris. There we go. I don't know why I forgot his name.
I love that clip when you showed it. That was an amazing. Ooh, 1 second of soundbite.
And that's what everyone said too. Is, well, he's a felon. Why are you going to trust a felon? Which I thought I thought was wondrous for people to say. But
wow.
but we have Janeway and we have Paris who call it a combat vessel, specifically designed.
It could be too that the short or long range explorer scientific vessel was the public name that Starfleet gave it, so that the general public wouldn't freak out that they were building more militarily advanced ships. It could be that Janeway's in the know; she knows the ship in and out. Obviously, it could just be that it's just one of those things, because we know that when the Defiant was built, there was a lot of pushback from the civilians, like, why are you building a warship? Well, not official canon, but different sources. So I can see the Federation, a lot of the civilians being like that, kind of like, you're not a military organization. We go out there looking for trouble, you're going to find it, it's going to come back here and kill us. Don't do that. So I don't know if them referring to it as a warship is because of that. They just know what it's technically capable of.
Well, they didn't call it a warship. Now, we should probably end soon, running high on time, but would you classify the Constitution class then as a ship built for combat?
Yeah. Well, it's a heavy cruiser.
It's a science vessel built for combat.
It's definitive. That is one thing I'd say, and if I need to come back, we can, but it was definitively built for two things: to explore new worlds and new inhabitants, and fight the Klingons. It was built for two reasons, in my opinion.
And so I think that the Intrepid is a combat-ready ship built for combat, but with the obvious, this is an explorer built for combat. It's like if you know your mandate. I mean, none of that crew signed on to be warriors, to do anything except explore. You know what I mean? That is their reason for this, and this is pre-Dominion War, so we're still, everyone's still in this thinking mindset, just before. So they're not going to be saying, yes, we're going to go out and explore. It's like, yeah, that's my resume. That is my title, Explorer, but we're on a tactical version of that Explorer. We're not on a Nova. We're not on a, he has to specifically classify, we're only a short-range survey vessel. Yes, because it's kind of a crap ship, comparatively to what's the cutting edge. So I think it's just the mindset. If you're all explorers anyway, you wouldn't even necessarily feel the need to say that. Whereas you say, this is an Explorer built for combat. Nice. We've got those phasers, guys. They're the full Mark 32s. Yeah.
Well, it's political, too. Starfleet, the Federation goes out of its way to say it's a peaceful organization, to say all we want to do is expand and all of us can get together, diversity for the win. And it doesn't make a lot of sense if you call the ships you make for warships, if you want diversity and expansion. I mean, again, as I started this out with, 50-50 science warship, I think, is fair. And I think post what I call Tng Pacifism would be them trying to stick to their motto and also trying to make warship. A good example is, I can only imagine what the comments are going to be after I bring this up, but there was an epic speech that I really liked in Axanar where you have Rodriguez, I think, Admiral Rodriguez, where he says, what I fear most is losing what we are over a Klingon battle fleet, which is to stop being Starfleet, to stop being scientists. And I think that is the mentality they had with Voyager going forward, in my opinion.
Cool. That's closing thought there. Stuart, your closing thought then.
I'd have to agree. I think it's a 50-50 split. I think all the ships of the era kind of are going that way. Even the Akira, the Steam Runner, maybe not so much the Steam Runner and Saber, but the Sovereign, they're designed for scientific missions first, but they have the capability to be either offensive or defensive should the need arise. And I think that's the best way to go about designing ships that are going to be exploring the unknown. If you're going to be exploring your solar system, yes, you don't need the weapons, but anything beyond that, you better be ready to fight. So yeah, that's my closing thought.
Yeah, I think Voyager's a great. We've learned our lesson ship. We still wanted to go out and explore, but look how many times the galaxy had to fight. Look how many times other ships of the class had to fight. We still want to explore, but the fact is we've got to stay on par with everyone else. So we've got to, and why do that? We've got to push, and because the ship's slightly cheaper in terms of resources, it's smaller, it needs less to function, we can make it more efficient and just get more out of its bundle. So I think 50-50 is fair, but I think it's more intertwined. It's a science vessel that's very tactically capable and is a good reflection of the peacekeeping plus... It's a TOS colony of the modern day, you know? It's both, but at the same time, you know? But hopefully science first, and certainly in Voyager they explored a lot of anomalies.
Anyway, guys, I think that's it for this discussion. We want to hear your thoughts. Chime in below in the comments section. Let us know what do you think this ship is, and give us your reasons for that. We love reading them, and we love learning more about what you guys think.
And this format is a bit more flexible, so if you guys have some incredible comments and whatever, I might have to do a sequel to this, because there is a lot more to talk about. I get the feeling of having this gone almost twice the runtime expected. So thank you so much, Mr. Reloaded.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
And do you have any closing thoughts about just, where can people find you, all that stuff?
Sure. If you guys want to check me out, you can go to youtube.com/lore reloaded, or check me out at twitter.com/lore reloaded, where we talk about stuff like this, have a lot of fun, a lot more laid back. A lot of people, not necessarily Trekyards, but a lot of people refer to me as the TMZ of Trek channels. So if you like that, definitely check it out. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next Trekyards.
That's right. So until then, guys, subscribe, like, do all that stuff, and go visit our Patreon and help us out. Until next time, I'm Captain Foley.
I'm Connor Coggins.
I'm Lore Reloaded.
Bye,
Bye, everybody.